No clue how this works. Okay. So I'll start off by introducing myself if I'm talking to anyone right now. As you can tell, this is our first Ask Me Anything, and this is about our product, MedValley. And so my name is McKay Byam. I'm an MD, and I'm also the founder and CEO of Simtech MD, which builds MedValley. And this is a part of a series that is going to be coming out where essentially we allow people that are part of our community to hop on, ask me live questions in our chat. Today, since this is our first one and we've got quite a small community right now, I'll essentially be asking questions that commonly come up on our feedbacks, reviews, or questions that I think you should have. We'll try and keep it relatively short, but after this, they're just going to be available. Well, maybe we'll do a few more public ones, but they'll likely just be available on our community access for our website. And so probably one of the first questions is, what is MedValley? So MedValley, our vision for what this is going to become is the world's first online VR medical school. And essentially what that means for this generation, I don't need to necessarily explain that, but you put a headset down over your eyes and you're completely surrounded by a virtual clinic. In these virtual clinics, they're virtual patients that you can perform all of the typical tasks you would when you're working in an emergency department shift or any of the clerkships or rotations that people go on. And so what that means is that we've got our virtual patient in front of us, and right now there's over 143 unique clinical interactions you can perform on these patients. Things like grabbing a stethoscope, holding it over the heart regions, or on the back, auscultation, listening to lung sounds, grabbing pulses, all of those types of things. And because this is happening in VR, and right now we're using the Meta Quest, you've got these controllers, and this allows you to essentially interact with the patient because it's tracking your hands. And when you go and you grab a pulse, it will vibrate, and you'll feel that vibrating in your hands, so you can tell the rate and rhythm of that. A natural question that comes up for people is this just available for people who are medical students? No, it's available for everyone. So right now the application's free. You can find it on the website that I'll link to here, or you can go directly to the Meta App Lab, and it's free. You can get access to that and start learning today, essentially. It is primarily geared right now for medical students that are probably more likely in years 1 through 3. Here, let me adjust the camera. That's just bothering me a bit. There we are. Makes a little bit more sense. Okay. So primarily right now, it's for medical students, years kind of 1 through 3, but it would be useful for pre-med students who are looking to get a jump on things. That said, focus on your exams, get into med school first. But this won't hurt if you are bright and you think you're going to get in. That said, we do have some users that are currently, they're maybe a doctor, they're in residency, or they're trying to qualify for exams in another country. So they'll sign on and start doing it. And essentially, you're practicing your OSCEs in here. So an OSCE is an objective structured clinical exam, and it's an opportunity to practice clinical skills like history taking, physical exams, and procedures. And so it's set up like that in VR, where you're outside of a door. On the door is a little vignette that describes a patient scenario. There's John Salk is our one of our virtual patients. And in the room is John Salk. He's having heart problems, and he needs you to come into the room and perform a cardiovascular physical exam. And so this allows you to go in and get that practice actually going through the activities in virtual reality, and so that you can develop those procedural processes that are really critical for medicine. Lots of you that are in medicine will know this, but I talk to a lot of people who kind of have interest in the app that are outside of medicine. And when I explain clinical skills to them, it's a little bit tough for them to comprehend it. They think of it more like a course or something you read, but I explain it's much more akin to a gymnast routine, where it's something that we have to practice again and again and again until you get so good at it that you can then enhance the difficulty. You can engage in clinical reasoning while you're doing that process. And so that's what we're trying to do, is to essentially allow medical students unlimited access to come in and practice those clinical skills and get so good at them that they can then engage in the clinical reasoning process, which the application is starting to develop. And so that's, in a nutshell, what MedValley is right now. And right now it's those histories, physical exams, and we're just starting to add things like procedures. We've got a vitals scenario, but we've got other things in the pipeline that are growing. And the application's free right now. We want a lot of users to go in and to play around with it, find all the problems, help it grow, give us feedback. Where the way you can support its development is by going to our medvalleyvr.com and joining our community, where you pay a subscription that goes directly to developers that are going to be helping grow. And we release probably once every 2 weeks is typical. Sometimes it's 3 if it's a bigger block of code or problems that are features that we're adding. But that's essentially what Mad Valley is, and how we've had a pretty exciting year in 2023. So let me just look at what I wanted to go through. So before I talk about any of the features, for someone who's first entering the application, I saw a comment recently, someone asking for a tutorial. We have some tutorials, but we want to make a course and to put that on our website and make that freely available. So if someone's interested, you can go in and think, what's this VR thing like? And so that you get an idea of that. But one of the safest bets is that once you get in the headset, you get into the application, on the door when you're selecting your patient, you can select between teach, train, and test. Teach mode is the most handholdy, so it's essentially going to guide you through the process, all the way to test mode, where you're not receiving any prompts, but you go in, perform your activity, and get your assessment at the end. So in teach mode, you'll go into the room. So highly recommend that you start with that. You'll go into the room and you'll see the patient, and on the wall behind the patient is a list of tasks you're going to perform. Next to each of those tasks are some categories like explanation, location, and by selecting those, it will tell you the brachial pulse is a place where you can feel the heartbeat, or the pulsatile nature of the heartbeat. It's typically just checked in smaller children, rarely checked, less regularly checked in adults, information like that. And then if you click explanation, it will show you how to actually perform that. And so the location will highlight over here, and it will say, hold the controller, your hand, over this region, pressing the trigger button with your index finger. That's how we grab pulses typically. And so that's a good way to guide you through each of the steps. And honestly, after doing a few, you start to intuit them, where you realize, okay, fine motor skills are typically the index finger, while more gross motor movements are with the middle finger, where you're grabbing something essentially. And so if you're going to grab your stethoscope, you would use that middle finger. But again, it's a fail-safe or safe-to-fail environment where go in, play, make mistakes, go in teach mode. After a few attempts, you will get the hang of it. The goal eventually. Right now, we are partners with a company called SenseGlove. They're terrific. They're too expensive right now for direct to customers, but I did a podcast with one of their representatives, Jordan Schnell. Sorry if I wrecked that last name. I think it is, but they're a terrific company. They've got these haptic gloves that essentially allow for finger tracking and force feedback and kinetic feedback, which means that when you reach out to grab virtual objects, the glove actually resists your movement, allowing you to literally feel like you're grabbing those virtual objects. That said, the controller does a large amount of that because you feel that resistance when you go and grab, and you, again, have these kind of intuitive keys for doing that. So if you don't know how, go in, use teach mode. We're going to be providing a course. Just let me know if there's other information that you'd like to hear as part of that. But that's the best way to start. Additionally, great, case groups. So here's the next question. What are case groups? What I mean by that is that when you go to a door, you select a patient. You're not selecting an individual patient's name. You'll select something like heart murmur. And within this category, well, I'll tell you the reason why we don't want it to be case by case, because if it was just case 1 heart murmurs, then you would figure out how to perform that particular case. And next time you're confronted with that, you know it was heart murmur 1, you would know what the outcome was. And we don't want that. We want a real environment where essentially you are being surprised and need to start engaging that clinical reasoning and trying to figure out what's happening here. So instead, what we use is case groups. When you click on case groups, cases will open up. So you can select them if you want to practice particular skills, but it's better to instead select random. And then when you click random, it will select a patient for you. And you'll enter the room. They'll tell you the tasks and you'll enter the room. A case group itself contains patients with similar presentations, and they're all slightly different. So they should have different differentials and eventually management. And should I talk about that now? Probably. A case group, the reasoning behind the case group is that there's a lot of information that you can learn in medicine. And trying to figure out what to learn can be a really challenging task. And it's funny to me that no one's talking about this as much, because people often talk about providing reliable, accessible, accurate information. But for probably the last 100 plus, way longer than that, actually, there has been more information to learn in medicine than any one individual can in their lifetime. And right now, things like ChatGPT, the advancements of AI, mean that rapidly accessible information is going to be the easiest thing ever for us to get. The challenge is how we take all that information and cram it into our brains so that we can become wise and engage in some of that higher level reasoning. And so that is a really interesting problem. And to me, case groups are one of the ways that we go about solving that. I'm going to talk about my clinic next, but in case groups, what the idea is that it's randomly presenting you with similar but different cases. And this is based on informational theory. And within informational theory, a person named Claude Shannon determined that you can actually figure out what information is most important. And you might think that all truth is equally as important, but that's not necessarily true. And I'll give you an example for that. And so if you're talking to someone and they're giving you directions to their house, and no one does this anymore because you just drop a pin or you just look up their address, but let's say they're giving you directions because they're over 100, and you're following those directions, and the directions say, okay, the house is going to look like this. Essentially there's an infinite amount of detail that you could provide a person about the house, which would all be true. It would all be an accurate way of trying to find and identify the house. Let's say they tell you in great detail the color of the trim, the roof, the size, all those things, the lawn size. You get there, and it's one of those subdivisions where all of the houses look the same. The information that you've learned wasn't useful, because the most important information is that which differentiates. So instead, they could have told you much less. They could have just said, it's the one with the red ball on the lawn. And you're probably thinking, again, that the number is the most important thing, and that is true. But the point being that would also be more important information, just like the red ball. And that might be the primary differentiator from that house, which is identical nearly to the house next to it, is the red ball that the kids put on the lawn that day. And so same is true in medicine, is that the most important information is that which helps you to differentiate. And so the idea of presenting people with random practice, meaning patients that aren't too different, but different enough, something about that causes your brain to begin to focus on the differences, as opposed to drilling down in one particular topic and completing it again and again and again till you master it. When you instead confront things in a random manner, but in a controlled random manner, your brain is trying to figure out what was the difference between this murmur and that murmur, this murmur and that murmur, and it's identifying that most important information. And so case groups are one attempt for us to help you with that process. And so really that means that select the random patient, and that's the best way to go about it, unless you need to cram a particular skill for a particular reason. You're going up to the ward, you're going to see a patient with pathology X, Y, and Z, and you want to impress the person with you, then cram that type of a case group. On that note, people often ask, how is MedValley growing? What are we doing when we're building? There's lots of things we're doing. One of the ways that it's growing is that we're adding cases to the case groups. And so each week or every 2 weeks, you will see multiple cases being added into case groups. And so this means that when you go in and you select murmur, right now it's selecting from, I believe, 4 or 5 cases, but in the future that will be 10. And then we may make a different case group where it would be diastolic heart murmurs, or more challenging ones where we have a case group around murmurs that deals with management. And so that's one of the things that we're adding as MedValley grows. Another way that it grows is that we're adding features. So we just recently introduced MyClinic. I'm going to talk about that soon, but we also are introducing in a few weeks multiplayer, which means that you can hop in and host a server and have a friend come on and study with them in the same virtual environment. So MedValley is growing when we add features and cases. And one of the benefits of being part of our community is that you can begin to recommend features to us, and we will prioritize those because it's all over our website and it's important. But I struggled a ton during as a medical student to make my learning efficient, and I got to the point where I felt like I was spending so much energy on making it efficient that I had just less time for actually learning. And that's a bit of a shame. And that's part of what we're trying to do, is to build in effective learning habits with the tech that's available now. And they're automated. There's forcing functions. The forcing function is something that absolutely forces you at a certain point to take a particular action, because that action is critical to the process that you're engaging in. So we're, in a sense, implementing forcing functions in learning so that you don't need to intentionally add all of these learning habits and remember to do them in a particular way and to create systems for tracking them, but instead to actually just spend your time doing the learning, which is hard enough. And so we're not trying to take away from harm we're not trying to take away from the challenge of learning medicine, but we are trying to help you confront the right challenges and not go through unnecessary suffering. And so that's how MedValley is growing right now. One of the features that we wanted to introduce is MyClinic. MyClinic is, again, another attempt to, MyClinic is basically like the Anki flashcard deck for clinical skills. So this is a room that you enter, and instead of going from blocks of study such as cardiology, resp, gastro, ED, those types of blocks, you instead go to one room. In that one room, you can stay there and you will be confronted with patient after patient after patient in that same room. But those patients are taking into account your history. It knows how well you've done or how poorly you've done on past scenarios. Those scenarios that you do worse on, you'll see more often. Those scenarios you do great on, you'll review less often. Similar to how Anki automates a process that's called spaced repetition. Spaced repetition is this interesting concept where you're meant to leave time between learnings to the point where forgetting almost sets in. And at that point, retrieval becomes so challenging and active that if you're able to retrieve it or even fail in retrieving it, that reinforces the memory more than if you were to review it more proximal to when you initially learned it. This is what makes cramming so ineffective. But Anki did a terrific job, and I used it a ton during my medical training, was to essentially mandate forced repetition. So those things which you do poorly, you will review more often. So the same is going to be true in the clinical, in the MyClinic, and just part of another one of our efforts to kind of implement those features that are going to force good studying habits into your life to make learning more effective. And another one of those attempts for us to help you navigate all the potential space of what you could learn, and instead help you navigate that efficiently and so that you can focus on the learning. Okay, so that's MyClinic. That's how you join and what you do, MyClinic. The last thing I'll go over then probably is, what is MedValley becoming? I mentioned at the beginning that we are trying to build the world's first VR medical school. And I'll kind of break that down in a more practical way. But essentially, it's starting out right now as something that we want to become more and more useful for one user. So one user enters in and can do and perform clinical skills, histories, physical exams, procedures. Now, we're expanding the scope of that, but we've got a pretty good baseline, so you can go in and you can do most things. I didn't mention this previously, but We actually have speech integration, so you can go in and talk with these patients. Our speech system's getting better. That's kind of one of those things on our roadmap. But essentially, this allows you to change the patient's position, ask them questions, and the patient will answer. Again, all part of trying to make what you learn in the VR as transferable to what you learn in clinic. And so that the skills learned here, you can immediately transfer them and apply them. And so right now it's that solo player experience where you're going in and learning that. But medical school is a lot more than just clinical experience. It's a huge part of medical school is your colleagues. It's your friends that you develop, and it's also the people that you look up to that are a few stages ahead of you. Whether that's a fourth year, interns, profs, all those people that we see that are ahead of us that have actually kind of accomplished that pathway. Medical school imparts that sense of collegiality of what it means to be a doctor, to be part of medicine. And it's a very exciting part. There's a lot of responsibility that's associated with that. So a one player experience doesn't fully reflect that. And we want to make it a situation that more fully reflects real life. And so what we're doing is first we're adding that the OSCE hall is what we call that, or VOSCEs, virtual OSCEs. That's expanding in content right now, but then we're expanding to emergency department. In the emergency department, essentially, it's going to become a more complex environment where you'll have more freedom, but a little bit more chaos that comes along with more advanced learning. It's essentially when you increase the extrinsic load. And so while yes, you can manage a patient, but can you manage, let's say 3 patients independently, each of those pathologies, and you can handle those, but can you do 3 at one time? That's the question. And then we start adding other people. And so that's part of the multi-user feature that we're adding. I think it should be this next month. I don't want to commit people to dates, but it should be in the next weeks to months that multiplayer is there. This then allows you to begin engaging in that same process and having a sense of teamwork with those peers that are learning with you. Moving on to next step after something like an emergency department, you got an emergency department with peers. Then we want to start connecting you with some of the medical educators that are online, people that are great teachers. They probably like teaching medicine more than they like practicing medicine. And having a skill like that, having a interest like that means that you need a great place to teach. And it's kind of hard for them to monetize their skills. Typically, they need to become an Instagram or YouTube influencer, which it might look like what we're trying to do, but we're not. We're not great at that. We're good at kind of building the project, building out the tech. But these people are good at that. And 124 characters or an Instagram post or a short, to me, just seems like it's selling these personalities or people short for what they could be providing to the medical community. Think of how great it would be if Dr. Mike or some of these other, people who are so good at extrapolating medicine and explaining to us, to be able to hop in a virtual space and teach a group study session where they take people through and walk people through OSCEs and help them have those skills where you can essentially get access to some of these people. And so the next part is to connect educators like that here. So if you are someone who likes teaching medicine, you like teaching fellow students, even if your knowledge is here right now and it'll eventually be here, this is a great time to get involved with something like this. And we are reaching out to people. We do have a short list of some people who have expressed interest. And so thank you to those, if any of you are watching. We appreciate that. And it's really a matter of timeline for when we're able to start adding that. So reach out to us and we'll kind of put you on that short list or that waiting list for when that's available. But that's how we see Med Valley growing. And then, hey, eventually we want to break out of that hospital and have some more functionality surrounding that hospital. But I hope you gives you a good overview of where we're at, what we're building, and lastly, how you could support it. Going in, using the application is terrific. We hope it's helpful for you. I believe that it's becoming a tool that I would have used for studying, which is a good indicator. I kind of went through my training during the time where online tools were first coming out and being developed. I was using osmosis videos when they used to finish them with the animator at the end, who would say, "Oh, this was great. I learned a lot about thyroid stimulating hormone today." And anyways, they don't have those anymore. That was when it was first coming out. They had probably under 100 videos. So I was part of that first wave of exam banks and online lecture series that were coming out. and I saw how effective it was for me, but there was really a big deficit in this clinical skills learning area. And that kind of drove me crazy. I had big spreadsheets to track my skills that I was learning and when to review them, but it all kind of fell short, and again took as much effort to maintain as it was to learn. And so we at SimTech and Med Valley really want this to be something that you all can latch onto. So please comment, add suggestions, join our community. So by using the app, you're helping, because Meta needs to see that people are using educational apps. They favor right now, Meta, Facebook, the VR company, they favor applications that are more gamified, where ours is more educational. We definitely plan on gamifying that more. I didn't mention that in our roadmap, but we absolutely want this to become fun for you, so that learning can be something that we all enjoy learning. We do, but sometimes it gets hard. Some of you have been studying for over 8 years, at this point in your life, and so we want to make that process more fun, more engaging. And then the other way is to join our community group. So by joining our community group, our community subscription, you're again directly building more and more features. And if you check out the comments and the reviews that we have so far on the Meta App Lab, you'll see that people really do love our team. That's not me, it's our developers. They're terrific. They do a lot to engage with the community and try and make sure that we're building what you want. And so please participate in any way you can. But either way, this is the first of many. Thanks for anyone who's listened, and submit any additional comments here, or come and join the community and I'll chat with you then. Anyways, thank you all. Best of luck in your study. Bye-bye.